Good morning, and welcome to the morning from the New York Times. It's Saturday, August 1st, 2026. I'm your host, and we've got a full edition today, a long-form essay on the quiet glory of errands, a cascade of political and international news, cultural dispatches from film and music in the Amazon rainforest, plus recipes, real estate, wedding trends, cookware advice, and the weekend's puzzles. Let's begin. We open with the essay that gives this issue its title, In Praise of Errands, written by Melissa Kirsch. She starts with a distinction we all feel but rarely articulate: the difference between a chore and an errand. Chores are domestic obligations, performed at home: laundry, dishes, vacuuming. An errand, by contrast, is an excursion with a purpose. The word traces back to Old English. An errand was a message or mission. An angel was an errandgast, a messenger ghost, divinely sent to perform a sacred duty. That etymology lingers in the feeling of an errand. You wander out into the world with a map to follow. Stop here to drop off the dry cleaning, now to replace the watch battery, onward to the supermarket, the pet food store. When you complete the route, the work is done. The metrics for success are clear and achievable. In a life full of open-ended anxieties, that clarity is a kind of grace. Kirsch builds her meditation around a social media show called, simply, Errands. Created by a 26-year-old filmmaker named Noah Blau, it documents friends undertaking tasks around New York City with an approach that elevates their mundane missions into something like heroes' journeys. My colleague Alex Vidukal tagged along recently as Blau filmed an episode featuring the comedian Ivy Wolk, on a mission to buy an air conditioner window unit and install it in her apartment. They met on a dead-end street in Bushwick, Brooklyn, lined with auto body shops, where Blau trained his Sony camcorder on Wolk as she navigated the hardware store, the stairwell, the window frame. The episodes are just a couple of minutes long, waste no time on introductions or establishing scenes. We're passengers for typically private expeditions, instantly thrust into someone's personal life, privy to their internal monologues, their serendipitous run-ins, their pit stops. Wolk distilled why a show so apparently mundane has become popular. Beauty is found in the minutiae, and the things that are banal are often the most interesting. It's those in-between moments of life where growth and realization happen. Blau told Alex that even when his subjects don't accomplish the errand, the concept still works. The show is about, I set out to do something, and did I accomplish it? So as mundane as the errand might be, everyone understands that feeling. Kirsch reflects on what errands reveal about other people, how running errands with a friend shows you how they live when you're not around, what they listen to in the car, what their hardware store is like, who they run into in the produce aisle. Other people's errands are revealing of their actual day-to-day lives, not the performed existence. Our best restaurant. That gets presented for company. She cites a recent piece by Dana G. Smith in the Times, where experts said running errands with a friend might help increase longevity. The reality of midlife is that it can be hard to carve out time for yourself, Dana writes, let alone coordinate schedules with another busy friend. But the research is striking. How you treat your body and brain in your midlife years, loosely defined as 40 to 60, can hugely influence how you age in the decades to come. The seeds for many age-related diseases, cardiovascular disease, diabetes, cancer, dementia, are sown in middle age. Margie Lockman, a psychology professor at Brandeis and author of Primetime, A New Vision for Midlife, told Dana, midlife is the ideal time to make changes, not only to benefit you in the present, but also in the future. And errands, it turns out, are a sneaky way to bundle movement, social connection, and purpose, three pillars of healthy aging, into a single Saturday afternoon. On the other hand, Kirsch has a friend who loves errands because they're excuses to not be with other people, a rare break from family duties. She praises the soft-touch socialization you get while out and about, the salesperson you chat with before going on your way, the neighbor you catch up with when you run into them at the dump. Kirsch cherishes the connective tissue of errands, the bursts of activity followed by respites of solitude, each stop its own tidy episode. Errands get us out of our own homes and out into the world. It's tempting to hibernate on weekends, to stay in and recharge. But the errand allows us to, as Virginia Woolf wrote, become part of that vast Republican army of anonymous trampers, whose society is so agreeable after the solitude of one's own room. From the philosophy of the everyday, we turn to the day's heavy news, and there's a lot of it, much of it centered on the Trump administration. First, a striking reversal in a federal case that had drawn national attention. Federal prosecutors said Friday they would drop charges against David Hearn, a former Olympic canoeist accused of vandalizing the renovated Lincoln Memorial reflecting pool in Washington. In an extraordinary motion, the U.S. Attorney in Washington, Jeanine Pirro, acknowledged that contractors hired by the Trump administration had botched the renovation, leaving behind widespread damage in the pool's new blue lining, and that the Interior Department had then falsely blamed that damage on vandals. Hearn had been accused of pulling up a piece of the pool's lining 2 feet square. The motion to dismiss the felony charge marks a rare instance of prosecutors effectively conceding that the government's own contractors caused the damage they attributed to a citizen. The reflecting pool, drained and relined as part of a multi-million-dollar project, became a political flashpoint. Now the administration's own Justice Department has admitted the truth. Meanwhile, President Trump's Board of Peace released a 15-point plan on Friday detailing a deal to disarm Hamas. The plan, announced a day after Trump unveiled the framework, calls in part for Israel to end its attacks and for Hamas to give up its weapons. But it remains deeply unclear whether either side will carry out the agreement. In its initial response, Hamas said the first step would be for Israel to commit to ending attacks, and linked the turnover of what the group called heavy weapons to a list of other conditions. The Israeli government has not issued a formal statement. The text says the parties have 2 weeks to negotiate implementation, a tight timeline for a conflict that has defied resolution for months. Adam Raskin, reporting from Tel Aviv, notes that the plans released by a Trump-appointed board, rather than through traditional diplomatic channels, adds another layer of uncertainty to an already fragile moment. Also on Friday, President Trump disputed the conclusion of U.S. and Minnesota state investigators that Iran was likely behind a cyber attack on dozens of municipal water systems in Minnesota. Instead, without offering evidence, Trump blamed the state and its Democratic governor, Tim Walz, claiming Minnesota's government was behind the attack on its own infrastructure. Walz dismissed the accusation in a social media post. The FBI had said late Thursday that Iran was the likely culprit, part of a pattern of Iranian cyber operations targeting U.S. critical infrastructure. Chris Cameron, reporting from Washington, writes that Trump's claim contradicts his own intelligence agencies and appears designed to shift blame to a political opponent ahead of the midterms. On Capitol Hill, Republicans in Congress have quietly blocked a proposal to expand military health coverage of in vitro fertilization treatment for service members and their families. The move, reported by Annie Carney, heeds calls from anti-abortion groups to limit access to a fertility option that President Trump himself had vowed to make more widely available. It's a notable shift. In previous years, there was enough bipartisan support for broadening IVF access in the military that it was included in the annual defense bill passing both House and Senate. Speaker Mike Johnson later stripped it out. The unanimous Republican vote against the expansion underscores how the politics of reproductive technology have hardened, even for a constituency, military families, that traditionally commands broad support. And the State Department announced Thursday it will issue an additional 250,000 commemorative passports featuring President Trump's portrait, intended to honor the nation's 250th anniversary. The first batch was released earlier this month in Washington. A department representative said Friday the expansion came after 30,000 Americans phoned a passport call center since July 4 looking to apply for that specific passport. The documents, which the White House has referred to as Trump passports, have drawn criticism for politicizing a federal identity document, but demand appears high. Let's go around the world. In Spain, tens of thousands of migrants rushed into the small Spanish territory of Ceuta from Morocco this week. Spain's pro-immigration prime minister mobilized the military to respond, and by night most of the migrants had left. The surge, one of the largest in years, tested the border of a territory that has long been a flashpoint for migration pressures at Europe's southern edge. Ceuta, a Spanish enclave on the North African coast, is separated from Morocco by a double fence. The breach overwhelmed authorities and reignited debates over EU migration policy and Spain's bilateral relationship with Morocco. President Trump backtracked Friday from a promise he made earlier this month to let Ukraine manufacture Patriot missiles, the most reliable weapon Ukraine has to shoot down Russian ballistic missiles. On July 8, during a meeting with President Volodymyr Zelensky on the sidelines of the NATO summit in Ankara, Trump had unexpectedly assented to sharing the technology, saying we'll give them the right to make Patriots and we'll show them how. Now, the administration has reversed course. Chris Cameron reports that the about-face came after pushback from Pentagon officials and defense contractors concerned about technology transfer and intellectual property. Ukraine had warned it was running out of Patriot interceptors. The reversal leaves a critical gap in its air defenses as Russian missile strikes intensify. FIFA scrapped its plan to allow private investment in the World Cup after soccer federations around the world criticized the move. In a statement late Friday night, FIFA President Gianni Infantino, under fire on multiple fronts, said, having listened carefully to all the views, it has become clear that the project has created divisions of a nature that, regardless of the level of support, are no longer in the interest of the objectives set out in the first place. Our purpose has always been, and will always be, to unite and improve. The plan would have sold a stake in FIFA's commercial and event operations to private investors. Opponents argued it would commodify the sport's crown jewel and undermine FIFA's governance. The U-turn is a significant defeat for Infantino, who had championed the initiative as a way to modernize FIFA's finances. And in Mexico, the country's premier public university, the National Autonomous University of Mexico, or UNAM, will require all students who passed its entrance exam to retake the test, after an investigation suggested widespread cheating, including with the aid of artificial intelligence. Annie Carrillo reports that a disproportionate number of applicants passed this year's exam, the first administered online, prompting the investigation. On Friday, university officials said all 75,000 students who passed would need to sit for a new, in-person exam. The scandal has shaken confidence in Mexico's most prestigious university and highlighted the global challenge educators face as AI tools make cheating easier and detection harder. Other big stories. In Arizona, law enforcement officials released 2 ransom notes addressed to Savannah Guthrie, the Today Show anchor, in the days after her mother, Nancy, vanished nearly 6 months ago. The first note, sent a day after the 84-year-old's kidnapping, said she was safe but scared and demanded millions of dollars. The second, sent several days later, said she had died unexpectedly of a medical condition. The Pima County Sheriff's Department released the notes Friday in search of new leads. Their release, nearly 6 months after the disappearance, is also a sign of how little apparent progress the investigation has made. The notes suggest whoever was responsible may not have intended to kill her, but the second note's claim of death remains unverified, and no body has been found. The head of the U.S. Coast Guard, Admiral Kevin Lunday, promised decisive action to prevent, recognize, and treat the brain injuries suffered by crews slamming through rough seas. In an email sent to the entire force Thursday, just hours after a Times investigation by Dave Phillips exposed the problem, Lunday wrote, "Our crews operate in a dangerous and unforgiving maritime environment. The demands of our missions are immense. We owe it to you to protect your long-term health from the damage caused by relentless wave pounding." Phillips' reporting, based in Cullowhee, North Carolina, follows veterans like Brett Bonner, who saved hundreds of lives over 21 years on rescue boats. By retirement at 40, Bonner suffered headaches, sleeplessness, memory loss, mood swings, symptoms consistent with repetitive mild traumatic brain injury from the constant slamming of small boats in heavy seas. The Coast Guard has long known the risks but failed to screen, diagnose, or treat affected crews. The Commandant's email signals a potential turning point. On a brighter technological note, plug-in solar power systems, smaller, cheaper than rooftop arrays, and able to plug into standard wall outlets, are becoming popular as more states legalize their use. 10 states now allow them. Ivan Penn and Claire Brown report from Los Angeles and New York on Melanie Jackson of Salt Lake City, who plopped 4 panels in her backyard after watching a YouTube video. In 6 months, she's lowered her electricity bill by about $77, not a fortune, but meaningful savings with little effort. "I just really appreciated the idea of being able to do something to cut even just a few dollars off my energy bill," she said. The systems typically don't require permits or electricians, lowering the barrier to entry for renters and homeowners alike. And forecasters expect blistering heat across the western United States this weekend. Temperatures could rise to 105 in Salt Lake City, 115 in Las Vegas, and 117 in Palm Springs. Amy Graff, on the Times weather team in San Francisco, reports that unusually hot temperatures, even for the depths of summer, are expected from Arizona to Montana. The National Weather Service has issued excessive heat warnings across a vast swath of the West. The heat raises wildfire risk, strains power grids, and endangers vulnerable populations, a reminder that climate extremes are becoming the new baseline. Now to culture. Tom Holland returns as Peter Parker in Spider-Man: Brand New Day, directed by Destin Daniel Cretton. Alyssa Wilkinson writes that the Spider-Man series has always been about growing up, and now its superhero has become an adult. At the end of No Way Home, Peter asked Doctor Strange to cast a spell making the world forget he's Spider-Man. This film picks up with him navigating anonymity, adulthood, and the quiet grief of a life no one remembers he saved. Wilkinson says it's smaller and more intimate than its predecessors, and it's unfortunately not as fun. The spectacle has been dialed down, the emotional stakes dialed up. But the result feels less like a Marvel movie and more like a character study that happens to have web shooters. Emmanuel Morgan, reporting from Los Angeles, adds context. In early meetings, Cretton and Sony Pictures chief Tom Rothman debated the meaning of grounded. Cretton said, "If the intention was to go bigger, I definitely would not have done this movie." The most recent live-action Spider-Man film had sent Peter through the multiverse. This one pulls back to a single neighborhood, a single life. It's a gamble for a franchise built on spectacle and at a moment when the superhero genre is teetering at the box office. Across the Atlantic, Game of Thrones is getting a stage adaptation at the Royal Shakespeare Company in Stratford-upon-Avon. Alexa Solowski, reporting from London and Stratford, describes a stifling rehearsal room in South London where dozens of actors pivoted, parried, and retreated as giant puppet horses watched from the sidelines. The production adapts George R.R. Martin's prequel saga, an ambitious undertaking for a company built on Shakespeare. The chief dancers in one scene are lion. The article cuts off, but the scope is clear: Westeros meets the Bard. Previews began Tuesday, opening night is August 8th. In music, Ariana Grande's new album Petal finds her dissatisfied with fame but offering few details on exactly why. Lindsay Zolads writes that the current hit, Hate That I Made You Love Me, sounds at first like another tale of romance gone sour, but in the bridge, Grande reveals the you is not one person but many. Is it really my fault you all gave me your heart? At the Guggenheim Museum, a major survey of pop art asks, what exactly did the movement give us? Walker Mims argues the show tries to extract a conscience from a movement that never really had one. Jaded, permissive, detached, amused pop art was always hard to define. It seemed both to argue and to rebut the idea that all visual experience, from Botticelli to family photos to Marlboro ads, occupies the same sensory plane. Though Anglo-American in origin, pop sent its bright shoots worldwide via print technology. And the prophecy it fulfilled was French, the belief that any object could pose as high art. Mims traces the movement's arc from Duchamp's death in 1968 and echo to the collapse of the movement's early energy through its global diffusion and its uneasy legacy in a world now saturated by the very image culture pop both celebrated and critiqued. And in a delightful coda to the culture section, bam! Just like that, a new generation has fallen in love with vintage clips of Emeril Lagasse. Kim Severson writes that clips of Emeril Live and Essence of Emeril are being shared millions of times on social media, especially on X. The chef himself is baffled. I continue to just keep scratching my head. For those who didn't grow up with Food Network in its prime, it's hard to explain what a superstar Lagasse was: 5 days a week, a house band, a live audience, guest stars, $333,000 a year in the late 90s, a then unprecedented salary. His catchphrases "bam, kick it up a notch" became cultural currency. Now, younger viewers are discovering his kitchen basics, his unironic enthusiasm, his sheer competence, and finding it charming in an era of performative authenticity. The internet's appetite for genuine craft, it turns out, is insatiable. Recipe of the week: Melissa Clark brings us Genevieve Ko's fruit crumble. Burbling with sweet, syrupy juices and topped with a nutty, chai spice-flavored streusel that happens to be gluten-free, it can be made with any fresh fruit you have in abundance: summer's berries and stone fruit, fall's apples and pears, or frozen berries all year long. A lovely, crowd-pleasing dessert no matter when you bake it. Real estate. The hunt. After their rent ballooned, a young couple, Juan Diego Devia and Haley Milan Devia, searched some of Miami's walkable neighborhoods for a single-family house or townhome where they could start a family. Scott McIntyre photographed their search. What did they choose? You can play the interactive game to find out. What you get for $1 million in Costa Rica: 3 options. A Bali-inspired villa with expansive sea views in the hills near Hatillo, Punta Arenas province, on the Pacific coast, 1 bedroom, 1 bath, with a 1-bedroom guesthouse, built in 2013, pool terrace, rainforest meets sandy beach, 5 miles north of Dominical, near Hacienda Baru National Wildlife Refuge. A 4-bedroom overlooking the Pacific Ocean. And a contemporary home in the rainforest canopy. Pick your favorite. And for $575,000, homes in Oregon City, Oregon, St. Louis, Missouri, and Birmingham, Alabama. The Oregon City property, for bedrooms, 2.5 baths, walking distance to the Willamette River and Willamette Falls, a Scottish-style pub a few blocks away, downtown with brew pubs and wood-fired pizza, 30 minutes to Portland, 45 to Mount Hood National Forest. 1,798 square feet, $320 per square foot. The St. Louis and Birmingham options offer their own trade-offs: space, location, character. Which would you choose? Living. More couples are incorporating QR codes into their weddings for RSVPs, seat assignments, sharing photos and videos. Shivani Vora reports the data from the Knot shows 59% of couples used QR codes for their weddings in 2026, according to a survey of 2,800 couples. The technology, ubiquitous during the pandemic, has found a second life in celebrations. Guests at Taylor Swift and Travis Kelce's July 3 wedding at Madison Square Garden were given entry by presenting a QR code, a security measure against party crashers. But for most couples, it's about ease, cost, expedience, and sustainability. The wet look, hairstylists give tips on how to wear the style, which plays well across a range of lengths and textures. Laura Regensdorf talked to the musician Tyla, the model Amber Valletta, and the hairstylist Candice Burns, whose clients include Harry Styles. If you're in a beautifully pressed Armani or Valentino suit, what's better than a great wet look that you can move your hands through? Burns says. The look telegraphs offhand ease, muster slicked back, seemingly fresh from the beach or the shower. Advice from Wirecutter: it's time to give up on the nonstick pan. Mace Dent Johnson writes that traditional nonstick